In the sleepy village of Littlehampton, a single gunshot shatters the peace of the Rectory, where Sir Reginald Vane, a despised diplomat, lies dead in Reverend Henry Baxter's study. As whispers of blackmail, hidden notes, and a military revolver ripple through the village, sharp-eyed spinster Miss Eleanor Finch unravels a web of secrets. From the chemist's mysterious sedatives to the housekeeper's burned letter, everyone, from the charming heir to the quiet gardener, hides something. Who lured Sir Reginald to his death, and why in the rector's own home? Dive into a classic tale of deception, where no one is what they seem, and the truth lies buried in the heart of the village. Chapter 1. The Storm. Before the silence. In the quiet village of Littlehampton, where the Dorset hills folded gently into one another like the pages of a well-loved book, life moved with the predictable rhythm of a church clock. The lanes, bordered by hedgerows tangled with honeysuckle, led past thatched cottages and the ancient stone church of St. Swithin's, where I, Reverend Henry Baxter, had served as rector for a decade. My days were filled with the small duties of a country clergyman: sermons to be written, parishioners to be comforted, and the occasional mediation of disputes over the church flower rota. It was a life of modest contentment, though not without its trials. For the village, like any close-knit community, thrived on gossip as much as it did on the harvests from the surrounding fields. My wife, Clara, 15 years my junior, brought a spark of vitality to the rectory. Her auburn hair and quick smile belied a sharp mind that often outpaced my own in matters of human nature. She had come to Littlehampton from London, where she had briefly trained as a governess, and though she adapted to village life with grace, I sometimes caught her gazing toward the horizon, as if yearning for the clamour of city streets. "Henry," she would say, "this village is charming, but it's like living in a teacup. Pretty, but dreadfully small." Her wit was a comfort, though it occasionally stirred unease among the more staid members of the parish, who preferred their rector's wife to be seen and not heard. The rectory itself, a rambling Georgian house with ivy-clad walls, stood at the edge of the village green, its windows overlooking the churchyard. It was a place of quiet dignity, its study lined with theological tomes and a few novels Clara insisted I read for broadening my horizons. The garden, tended by Mr. Polk, a laconic man with a limp from the Great War, was a riot of roses. In summer, though by late August, when this tale begins, the blooms had begun to fade under the weight of an unseasonably warm sun. The tranquillity of Littlehampton was disrupted 6 months prior with the arrival of Sir Reginald Vane, a retired diplomat who had purchased Hampton Hall, the grandest house in the parish. Sir Reginald was a man of imposing stature, with a hawk-like nose, piercing grey eyes, and a voice that could carry across a room like a cannon shot. His tailored suits and gold pocket-watch spoke of wealth, but his manner suggested a man accustomed to command, not compromise. He had served in embassies across Europe, or so he claimed, and his stories of diplomatic triumphs were as frequent as they were tiresome. The villagers, initially awed by his prestige, soon found him insufferable. He dismissed the Women's Institute as a gaggle of interfering hens, accused Mr. Gibbs, the butcher, of selling subpar meat, and even suggested the church bell was rung too loudly on Sundays. "Baxter," he told me once, "your parish is a backwater. It needs discipline." I smiled politely, but inwardly I bristled. Sir Reginald's presence was like a stone dropped into a still pond, sending ripples of discontent through the village. Mrs. Tuttle, the postmistress, whose sharp tongue was matched only by her sharper memory, declared him a blight on Little Hampton. Mr. Gibbs, a burly man with a quick temper, muttered darkly about teaching the old goat a lesson. Even young Tommy, Gibbs, the butcher's son, who spent his days delivering parcels on his bicycle, took to mimicking Sir Reginald's pompous stride behind his back. The village, it seemed, had united in its dislike of the newcomer, though none dared confront him directly, for his wealth and influence cast a long shadow. On a sultry Tuesday afternoon, as I sat in my study drafting a sermon on patience, a virtue I felt sorely tested by Sir Reginald's recent complaints, Clara announced an unexpected visitor. "Sir Reginald is here, Henry," she said, her tone laced with amusement. "He looks like he's swallowed a lemon." Before I could respond, the man himself strode into the room, his cane tapping sharply on the oak floorboards. He wore a linen suit, immaculate despite the heat, and his expression was one of barely concealed irritation. "Baxter," he began without preamble, "your sermons are interminable. 3/4 of an hour last Sunday. I nearly dozed off, and I'm not alone in saying so. Cut them to 20 minutes, or I'll reconsider my contributions to the Church Restoration Fund." His words were delivered with the authority of a man who expected obedience, and I felt a flush of indignation. The church fund, a modest sum for repairing St. Swithin's leaking roof, relied heavily on Sir Reginald's largesse, a fact he never let me forget. I murmured something about balancing spiritual nourishment with brevity, but Sir Reginald waved a hand dismissively. "Spare me the platitudes, Rector. And another thing, your gardener's work is slipshod. Those roses are a disgrace. I expect better from a rectory garden." With that, he turned on his heel and left, leaving the air in the room heavier than the August heat. Clara, who had lingered in the doorway, raised an eyebrow. "That man," she said, "has a talent for making enemies. If he keeps this up, someone might do more than grumble." Her words were light, but they carried an edge that made me uneasy. Clara was not one for idle threats, but her dislike of Sir Reginald was no secret. She had clashed with him at a parish meeting over his proposal to fence off part of the common land, and her spirited defence of village tradition had won her admirers, if not his goodwill. That evening we dined at the cottage of Miss Eleanor Finch, a spinster of 60, whose sharp intellect and keen observation made her the unofficial chronicler of Little Hampton's affairs. Her home, a quaint stone cottage overflowing with books, botanical sketches, and curios from her travels, was a haven of quiet curiosity. Miss Finch, with her silver hair pinned neatly, and her spectacles perched on a nose that seemed designed for peering into secrets, had a way of seeing through the village's polite veneer. "Sir Reginald," she said as she poured tea from a chipped porcelain pot, "is a man who thrives on control. But control breeds resentment, and resentment can turn dangerous." Her words hung in the air as Clara nodded. "He's alienated half the village," she said. "Mrs. Tuttle says he insulted her cousin's baking at the fete, and Mr. Gibbs is still fuming over that business with the sausages." I chuckled, but Miss Finch's expression remained serious. "It's not just the villagers," she said. "His nephew, Lionel Vane, bears the brunt of his temper. I saw them arguing in the lane yesterday. Lionel looked ready to bolt." Lionel Vane, a handsome young man of 28, had arrived with his uncle, but lacked Sir Reginald's force of character. He was charming, with a ready smile and a penchant for poetry, but his debts, incurred through reckless spending in London, were the talk of the village. Sir Reginald, it was said, kept him on a tight leash, threatening to cut him off without a penny. I had met Lionel at church, where he sat in the family pew, his eyes wandering as if seeking escape. A young man with motive, Miss Finch mused, but perhaps not the courage. The conversation turned to other matters, the harvest festival, the new hymnals, but I couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. Little Hampton, for all its charm, was a place where secrets simmered beneath the surface. Mrs. Lydia Crane, Sir Reginald's housekeeper, was another figure of interest. A widow of striking beauty, with dark hair and a reserved manner, she had arrived with Sir Reginald and kept to herself. Whispers suggested Sir Reginald's interest in her was more than professional, though she rebuffed his advances with quiet dignity. "Mrs. Crane is no fool," Miss Finch said. "She sees more than she says." As we walked home under a sky streaked with crimson, Clara slipped her arm through mine. "Henry, do you think Sir Reginald knows how much he's disliked?" she asked. I considered the question, my mind drifting to the man's arrogance, his casual cruelty. "He must," I said, "but he doesn't care. Men like him believe they're untouchable." The rectory was quiet as we entered, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Clara lit a lamp, casting long shadows across the walls. "This village," she said softly, "is too small for a man like Sir Reginald. Something's bound to give." I nodded, but my thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the web of tensions that had begun to tighten around Little Hampton. Sir Reginald Vane, for all his bluster, had set in motion a chain of events that would soon shatter the village's fragile peace. Chapter 2. The Echo of the Shot. The evening of Wednesday, August 12th, began with the kind of oppressive stillness that settles over Little Hampton when the summer heat lingers past its welcome. The air in the rectory was heavy, the windows thrown open in a futile attempt to coax a breeze. I, Reverend Henry Baxter, sat at my desk in the study, wrestling with a sermon on forgiveness, a topic that felt increasingly ironic, given the village's growing resentment toward Sir Reginald Vane. My fountain pen scratched across the page, the words coming slowly, as my thoughts drifted to the diplomat's recent visit and his imperious demands. Clara, my wife, was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she prepared tea, her presence a quiet comfort amidst my vexation. At precisely 7:45, as the church clock chimed the quarter hour, a sound tore through the rectory like a thunderclap. A single sharp gunshot. It came from the direction of my study, though I had stepped into the hall moments before to retrieve a book from the parlour. The noise was so sudden, so alien in our peaceful home, that for a moment I stood frozen, my hand on the parlour door. Clara appeared at the end of the hall, her face pale but composed, her apron dusted with flour. "Henry, what was that?" she asked, her voice steady despite the alarm in her eyes. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding. "It sounded like a shot from the study." Together we hurried back, the oak floorboards creaking under our steps. The study door was ajar, as I had left it, but a faint, acrid smell hung in the air, like burnt cordite. Pushing the door open, I stopped dead, my breath catching in my throat. There, slumped over my desk, was Sir Reginald Vane, his once imposing frame now lifeless, a dark stain spreading across the blotter beneath his head, a bullet hole marred his temple, and a sleek black revolver lay on the floor beside him, glinting in the lamplight. The window behind the desk stood wide open, its curtains swaying slightly, though the evening was still. Clara gasped, clutching my arm. "Henry, he's dead," she whispered. I nodded, my mind reeling. Sir Reginald, the man who had stormed into our lives with such arrogance, was gone, his authority extinguished in an instant. I stepped closer, noting the papers on my desk, my sermon notes now stained with blood, and the untouched glass of water I had left for myself earlier. The scene was surreal, a violation of the rectory's sanctity that left me dizzy with shock. "Stay here," I told Clara, though my voice trembled. "I'll fetch Dr. Morton and telephone the police." She nodded, her eyes fixed on the body, her expression unreadable. I hurried to the telephone in the hall, dialing Dr. Morton's number with shaking hands. The doctor, a wiry man with a perpetually harried air, promised to come at once. Next, I rang Inspector Graves, the county police officer stationed in Dorchester, whose gruff demeanour I had encountered during a minor theft case the previous year. "A murder, you say?" he barked through the receiver. "Don't touch anything, Reverend. I'll be there in 20 minutes. By the time I returned to the study, Clara had lit another lamp, casting harsh light on the grim tableau. "Henry," she said softly, "why here? Why in our home?" I had no answer, only a growing sense of unease. The rectory, a place of solace, had become a stage for violence, and I could not shake the feeling that the choice of location was deliberate. Dr. Morton arrived first, his black bag in hand, his face grim as he examined the body. "Shot through the head," he confirmed, his fingers probing gently. Death was instantaneous, I'd say, within the last hour, around 8 o'clock perhaps. He pointed to the absence of powder burns around the wound. This wasn't self-inflicted. Someone stood close, but not too close. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Inspector Graves arrived shortly after, his heavy boots thudding on the gravel path. He was a man of middle age, with a drooping moustache and eyes that missed nothing. Behind him came Constable Reed, a young officer with a nervous habit of adjusting his cap. The inspector surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on the revolver. "A Webley Mark IV, he said, almost to himself. "Not a common piece in a village like this." He turned to me. "Reverend, who was in the house when this happened?" "Just Clara and I said. "Our maid, Jenny, had the evening off, and Mr. Polk, the gardener, leaves at 6. Graves nodded, jotting notes in a small black book. "And you heard nothing before the shot? No voices, no struggle?" I shook my head, and Clara echoed my denial. "I was in the kitchen," she said. "I heard only the shot." By now, a small crowd had gathered outside, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Tuttle, the postmistress, hovered near the garden gate, her shawl clutched tightly, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. Tommy Gibbs, the butcher's son, lingered on the lane, his bicycle propped against a hedge. "I saw a light in the study earlier," he called out, eager to be noticed. "Thought it was the Reverend working late." Inspector Graves waved him off, but I caught a glance from Miss Eleanor Finch, who had appeared silently among the onlookers. Miss Finch, with her silver hair and piercing gaze, was a figure of quiet authority in Littlehampton. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Inspector, might I have a word?" Graves frowned but allowed her to approach. She studied the study from the doorway, her eyes darting from the body to the open window. "No footprints outside," she observed. "The ground is dry, but the window suggests an intruder. Yet the shot was close. Too close for someone climbing through." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but I sensed a mind already at work, piecing together fragments others overlooked. Graves bristled. "Miss Finch, this is a police matter. Kindly leave it to us." She smiled thinly, undeterred, and retreated to the garden, where she began speaking quietly with Mrs. Tuttle. I watched her, marvelling at her composure. Miss Finch had a reputation for noticing what others missed. Her cottage, a repository of village secrets gleaned from years of observation. Clara, standing beside me, whispered, "She's already investigating, isn't she?" I nodded, unsure whether to be comforted or unnerved by her interest. The inspector questioned us further, his manner methodical, but impatient. "Sir Reginald was not a popular man," he said, eyeing me closely. "Any enemies you know of, Reverend?" I hesitated, aware of the village's collective dislike. "He was difficult," I admitted. "He clashed with many. Mr. Gibbs the butcher, for one, and his nephew, Lionel Vane, had his share of disagreements." Graves raised an eyebrow. "Lionel Vane, eh? The heir to Hampton Hall?" I nodded, recalling Lionel's strained demeanour. At church, his charm overshadowed by a restless air. Clara added, "Mrs. Tuttle mentioned an argument Sir Reginald had with a woman in the lane last week. She didn't see who, but she swore it was heated." Graves made a note, his expression unreadable. "We'll speak to the nephew and the butcher," he said, "and this woman, if we can find her." He turned to Constable Reed. "Secure the scene. No one touches that revolver until the forensic lads arrive." As the police worked, I noticed Clara's hands trembling slightly as she poured tea for the inspector. "Henry," she said quietly, "this will change everything. The village won't rest until the killer is found." Her words, though soft, carried a weight that unsettled me. Clara was no stranger to the village's undercurrents, and I wondered what she might have overheard in her daily rounds. Gossip at the post office, whispers at the Women's Institute. Miss Finch lingered in the garden, her notebook in hand, jotting observations as the crowd dispersed. I approached her, seeking some clarity in the chaos. "Miss Finch," I said, "what do you make of it?" She looked up, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "A murder in a rectory is no accident," she said. "The choice of place, the time, it's deliberate. Sir Reginald was lured here, I'd wager, and the killer knew your habits, Reverend." Her words sent a chill through me. I was meant to visit Mrs. Tuttle that evening, but had stayed home with a headache, a fact known only to Clara and Jenny. As the police cordoned off the study, I caught sight of the revolver again, its cold metal glinting like an accusation. Was not a weapon I recognized, nor one I imagined belonged to any villager. Its presence was a puzzle, one that Miss Finch seemed determined to solve. "The revolver," she murmured almost to herself. It's military, isn't it? Not the sort you find in a Dorset village. We must ask who had access to such a thing. Clara joined us, her face drawn but her voice steady. Henry, we should check on Jenny. She'll be distraught when she hears. I agreed, grateful for a task to distract me. As we walked to the maid's cottage, I couldn't shake Miss Finch's words. The rectory, my sanctuary, had become a crime scene, and the killer, it seemed, had walked among us, unseen, but deliberate. The village of Littlehampton, with its quaint cottages and whispering hedgerows, held a secret that would not stay buried for long. Chapter 3. The Village Stirs. The morning after Sir Reginald Vane's murder dawned with a deceptive brightness, the sun casting golden light over Littlehampton's thatched roofs and dew-kissed lanes. Yet beneath this serene facade, the village was alive with whispers, as if the very hedgerows conspired to spread the news. The rectory, once a haven of quiet piety, now stood under a cloud, its study cordoned off by Inspector Graves' men, who moved with the grim efficiency of those accustomed to tragedy. I, Reverend Henry Baxter, found myself at the heart of this upheaval, my usual routine of morning prayers disrupted by the weight of the previous night's horror. Clara, ever resilient, had risen early to prepare breakfast, though her usual cheer was tempered by a thoughtful silence. "Henry," she said, setting a pot of tea on the table, "the village will be unbearable today. Everyone will have a theory, and none will be kind." Her words were prescient, for as I stepped onto the green, I was met by a chorus of hushed voices. Mrs. Tuttle, the postmistress, stood at the door of her shop, her arms crossed, regaling a knot of women with her version of events. I saw a man in a dark coat near the rectory at dusk," she declared, her eyes gleaming with the authority of a self-appointed oracle. "Not a local, mark my words, a stranger with mischief in mind." I nodded politely, though I doubted her tale. Mrs. Tuttle's imagination was as fertile as her garden, and her stranger was likely a shadow cast by her own excitement. Nearby, Tommy Gibbs, the butcher's son, leaned against his bicycle, recounting to a group of boys how he'd seen the police carry away a gun big enough to fell an ox. His exaggeration drew gasps, and I made a mental note to caution him later about spreading tales. The village, I realized, was weaving a tapestry of rumour, each thread more colourful than the last. Inspector Graves had set up a temporary headquarters in the village hall, a squat building beside the church, where he and Constable Reed were interviewing witnesses. I made my way there, hoping to learn more, but found the door guarded by a stern-faced officer. "No admittance, Reverend," he said. "Inspector's orders." Disappointed, I turned back, only to encounter Miss Eleanor Finch, who was striding across the green with the purpose of a general marching to battle. Her grey coat was buttoned tightly, and her notebook peeked from her pocket, a testament to her relentless curiosity. "Good morning, Reverend," she said, her spectacles catching the sunlight. "A dreadful business, but not without its puzzles." Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a spark of excitement, as if the murder were a chessboard awaiting her next move. "I've been thinking about that revolver," she continued. "A Webley Mark IV, military issue, not the sort of thing one finds in a butcher's shop or a postmistress's drawer. We must consider who in Littlehampton might have access to such a weapon." I nodded, recalling Lionel Vane's brief stint in the army before his uncle summoned him to Hampton Hall. Lionel, perhaps, I suggested. Miss Finch's lips twitched in a half-smile. Possibly. But let's not leap to conclusions. The village is full of secrets, and secrets have a way of surfacing when stirred. Her words lingered as she excused herself, heading toward the post office, no doubt to sift through Mrs. Tuttle's gossip for grains of truth. Back at the rectory, Clara was entertaining Dr. Morton, who had stopped by to discuss the post-mortem. The bullet was a .38 caliber, consistent with the Webley, he said, sipping tea. No signs of a struggle, which is odd. Sir Reginald was a strong man. He'd have fought back if he saw it coming. Clara frowned, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. So, the killer was someone he trusted, she asked. Dr. Morton shrugged. Or someone who moved quickly. The shot was precise, almost professional. The word professional jarred me. Little Hampton was no place for hired killers, yet the revolver's presence suggested a world beyond our village's borders. I mentioned this to Clara after Dr. Morton left, but she was distracted, her gaze fixed on the garden where Mr. Polk was pruning the roses with unusual vigour. "Henry," she said, "do you think Mr. Polk heard anything last night? He's always lingering about, and Sir Reginald insulted his gardening only yesterday." The idea had merit. Mr. Polk, a taciturn man with a weathered face and a limp from a war wound, was fiercely proud of his work. Sir Reginald's scorn might have stung more than he let on. I resolved to speak with him, but first I visited the church to offer a prayer for guidance. The cool stone interior was a balm to my nerves, though the sight of the pulpit, where I had last seen Sir Reginald alive, brought a pang of unease. As I knelt, I heard footsteps and turned to find Jenny, our maid, hovering near the vestry door. "Reverend," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to tell you something." Jenny, a slight girl of 19 with a nervous habit of twisting her apron, had been shaken by the murder, but insisted on returning to work. "Last week I saw Sir Reginald arguing with Mrs. Crane in the Hall's garden. He was shouting, and she looked frightened. I didn't hear much, but he said something about keeping her place, or he'd make her sorry." Her words sent a chill through me. Mrs. Lydia Crane, Sir Reginald's housekeeper, was a figure of quiet mystery, her beauty and reserve making her a subject of village speculation. "Thank you, Jenny," I said. "Have you told the police?" She shook her head. "I was afraid they'd think I was meddling, but I thought you should know." I assured her she'd done right and sent her back to the rectory, my mind racing. Mrs. Crane's fear suggested a deeper conflict with Sir Reginald, one that might hold the key to his death. That afternoon, I joined Clara for tea at Miss Finch's cottage, a cosy haven cluttered with books and botanical drawings. Miss Finch was in high spirits, her notebook now filled with cryptic jottings. "I've spoken to Mrs. Tuttle," she said, pouring tea from a silver pot. "Her stranger in a dark coat is likely a fabrication, but she did mention seeing Lionel Vane near the rectory 2 days ago, looking agitated, and Mr. Gibbs, the butcher, was overheard threatening to settle things with Sir Reginald after their last row." Clara leaned forward. "What about Mrs. Crane? Jenny saw her, arguing with Sir Reginald." Miss Finch's eyes gleamed. "Did she now? That's most interesting. Mrs. Crane is a woman of secrets, I suspect. I've noticed her visiting Mr. Wells, the chemist, more often than one would expect for headache powders." Her tone was casual, but I sensed she was building a case, piece by careful piece. The conversation turned to Lionel Vane, whose debts and strained relationship with his uncle made him a natural suspect. "He was at the Red Lion last night," I said, recalling the pub's raucous laughter drifting across the green. "Mr. Hodge, the barman, would know if he stayed all evening." Miss Finch nodded. "An alibi is only as good as its witness. We must verify it, and we mustn't overlook the revolver's origin. Military men, or those with access to their effects, are not so common here." As we left Miss Finch's cottage, the village seemed to close in around us, its familiar lanes now tinged with suspicion. At the post office, Mrs. Tuttle was still holding court, her voice carrying to the green. "I'm telling you, it's that nephew," she said to a customer. "All smiles, but he's after the inheritance, you mark my words." Nearby, Tommy, Gibbs, was polishing his bicycle, his eyes darting toward the rectory as if expecting another drama to unfold. Clara, walking beside me, slipped her arm through mine. "Henry, this murder has stirred up more than gossip. People are afraid, but they're also eager. It's as if they've been waiting for something to break the monotony." Her observation was astute, and I felt a pang of guilt for not noticing it sooner. Little Hampton, for all its charm, was a place where grudges festered, and Sir Reginald's death had given those grudges a stage. Back at the rectory, I found Mr. Polk in the garden, his shears snipping with a rhythm that seemed almost defiant. "Mr. Polk," I said, approaching cautiously, "did you notice anything unusual yesterday, before you left?" He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Reverend, except Sir Reginald, poking about, criticising my roses. Said they weren't fit for a dog's grave." His tone was bitter, and I wondered if the insult had cut deeper than he admitted. As dusk fell, the village settled into an uneasy quiet, the church clock tolling the hours like a warning. I sat in the parlour, staring at the closed study door, where Sir Reginald's body had been removed, but his presence lingered. Clara joined me, her face drawn. "Henry," she said, "this isn't just about Sir Reginald. Someone chose our home, our study. Why?" Her question echoed Miss Finch's earlier words, and I felt a growing dread. The killer had walked among us, leaving a trail of clues that pointed to the heart of Little Hampton's secrets. The challenge now was to follow that trail before the village's fragile peace unravelled completely. Chapter 4. The Cracks in the Alibi. The third day after Sir Reginald Vane's murder brought a restless energy to Little Hampton, as if the village itself were straining under the weight of its own secrets. The sun, still unrelenting in its August blaze, seemed to mock the sombre mood that hung over the green, where knots of villagers gathered, their whispers sharp with speculation. The rectory, my home and sanctuary, remained a focal point of curiosity, its windows watched by curious eyes from the post office to the Red Lion pub. I, Reverend Henry Baxter, felt the burden of this scrutiny keenly. My usual duties, overshadowed by the grim task of navigating a village turned detective. Clara, my wife, was in the kitchen, kneading dough with a vigour that betrayed her unease. "Henry," she said, brushing flour from her hands, "the village is like a pot about to boil over. Everyone's pointing fingers, and I heard Mrs. Tuttle say Lionel Vane was seen sneaking about the night of the murder. Her words echoed the gossip that had reached me earlier, and I felt a pang of disquiet. Lionel Vane, Sir Reginald's nephew and heir, was a natural suspect, his charm and debts making him a figure of both fascination and suspicion. Yet I wondered if the village's eagerness to blame him was too convenient, a distraction from deeper truths. Inspector Graves had summoned Lionel to the village hall for questioning, and I decided to visit, hoping to glean some insight into the investigation. The hall, usually a place of jumble sales and parish meetings, was now a makeshift command post, its tables cluttered with police notebooks and maps. Constable Reed stood guard at the door, his youthful face strained with the importance of his task. "Reverend," he said, tipping his cap, "the inspector's with Mr. Vane now. Best not interrupt." I nodded but lingered, catching snippets of raised voices from within. Through the open window, I heard Lionel's cultured tones tinged with indignation. "I was at the Red Lion all evening, Inspector. Ask Mr. Hodge. He'll tell you I never left." Graves' response was a low rumble, sceptical and probing. "We'll see about that, Mr. Vane. Your uncle's death leaves you a tidy inheritance, doesn't it? A man in your debt might find that tempting." Lionel's reply was sharp, but I couldn't catch the words as Constable Reed shooed me away with a polite but firm gesture. Frustrated, I walked to the Red Lion, a low-beamed pub where the air was thick with the scent of ale and pipe smoke. Mr. Hodge, the barman, was polishing glasses, his ruddy face creased with worry. "Reverend," he said, glancing about to ensure we were alone, "I told the police Lionel was here till 10, drinking with the lads. He was 3 sheets to the wind, no mistake." His certainty was reassuring, but I recalled Miss Eleanor, Finch's words about alibis being like lace, pretty but easily torn. "You're sure he didn't leave at all?" I asked. Hodge hesitated, his cloth pausing mid-swipe. "Well, I was busy, you know. Might have stepped out back for a moment, but Lionel was here when I returned." His hesitation was a crack in the story, and I made a mental note to share it with Miss Finch. As I left the pub, I encountered Tommy Gibbs, the butcher's son, loitering near the door with his usual air of eager mischief. "Reverend," he said, his eyes bright, "I heard something odd. That night I saw Mr. Hodge slip out the back of the pub around 8. He looked sneaky, like he didn't want to be seen." Tommy's penchant for exaggeration was well known, but his observation aligned with Hodge's faltering account. I thanked him and urged him to tell Inspector Graves, though I suspected the boy preferred the thrill of gossip to official channels. Back at the rectory, I found Clara in the parlour, sorting through parish correspondence with a distracted air. "Henry," she said, "I've been thinking about Mrs. Crane. Jenny's story about her argument with Sir Reginald keeps nagging at me. What if she had more to hide than a mere disagreement? Mrs. Lydia Crane, Sir Reginald's housekeeper, was a figure of quiet enigma, her beauty and reticence fueling village speculation. Jenny's account of their heated exchange suggested a motive, but I hesitated to leap to conclusions. "We must be careful," I said. "Accusations without proof will only stir more trouble." Miss Finch arrived shortly after, her grey coat dusted with pollen from her walk through the lanes. She carried a small parcel, which she unwrapped, to reveal a pair of gardening gloves. "A gift for Mr. Polk," she said, her smile enigmatic. "I thought to have a word with him about the roses, and perhaps the night of the murder." Her approach was classic Finch, disarming yet deliberate, and I marvelled at her ability to turn a casual visit into an investigation. We found Mr. Polk in the Rectory garden, his shears snipping with a rhythm that seemed to channel his frustration. "Miss Finch," he said, touching his cap, "what brings you here?" She handed him the gloves, her voice warm but probing. "I heard Sir Reginald was unkind about your roses. Must have been vexing, especially the day before he died." Polk's face darkened, his limp more pronounced as he shifted his weight. "He had no call to insult my work," he said, "called my roses a pauper's bouquet. But I was home by 6 that night as always." Miss Finch nodded, her eyes scanning the garden beds. "Of course, though I noticed the gate near the study window. It's often left unlatched, isn't it? Easy for someone to slip in unnoticed." Polk's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, returning to his pruning with renewed vigour. As we walked away, Miss Finch murmured, "He's defensive. And that gate, dry ground or not, it's a weak point in the Rectory's defences." That evening, Clara and I dined alone, the silence between us heavy with unspoken questions. The Rectory felt different, now, its familiar corners shadowed by the memory of Sir Reginald's body. "Henry," Clara said, pushing her plate aside, "I overheard something at the Women's Institute today. Mrs. Tuttle claims she saw Lionel arguing with a man in a tweed cap near the church last week. She couldn't hear what was said, but Lionel looked furious." The image of Lionel, usually so composed in a heated dispute, was intriguing, and I resolved to share it with Miss Finch. The next morning I visited Hampton Hall, hoping to speak with Lionel myself. The hall was a sprawling Georgian manor, its grandeur marred by peeling paint and overgrown lawns, a testament to Sir Reginald's parsimony despite his wealth. Lionel greeted me in the drawing-room, his charm strained by dark circles under his eyes. "Reverend," he said, offering a weak smile, "this business has turned my life upside down. The police think I killed him for the money, but I swear I was at the pub." His voice cracked, and I sensed genuine distress, though whether from grief or fear I couldn't tell. "Mrs. Tuttle mentioned an argument," I said gently, "with a man in a tweed cap. Do you recall it?" Lionel's face paled, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "That was nothing," he said quickly. "Just a creditor from Dorchester pressing me about a debt. Uncle was tight with funds, you know." His explanation was plausible, but his unease suggested more. I left the hall with a growing sense that Lionel's alibi, like Hodge's testimony, was not as solid as it seemed. Miss Finch was waiting at the Rectory when I returned, her notebook now a thick sheaf of observations. "I've been to the Red Lion," she said, her eyes gleaming. "Mr. Hodge admits he left the bar briefly around 8 to check the cellar. Convenient, don't you think? And I found this near the Rectory gate." She produced a small brass button etched with a faint crest. "It's from a man's coat, possibly military, not unlike something Lionel might own, given his army days." Clara, joining us, examined the button. "It could belong to anyone," she said, but her tone was uncertain. Miss Finch smiled. "True, but it's a start. And Mrs. Crane. I've learned she was seen leaving the hall in a hurry the evening of the murder, carrying a small bag. She told the police she was visiting a friend, but no one can confirm it." The housekeeper's mysterious movements added another layer to the puzzle. and I felt the weight of the village's secrets pressing closer. As the day drew to a close, I stood at the rectory window, watching the shadows lengthen across the green. The village, with its quaint cottages and whispering lanes, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next revelation. Miss Finch's button, Lionel's faltering alibi, and Mrs. Crane's secretive departure were threads in a tapestry that was far from complete. The murder in my study had exposed fault lines in Littlehampton, and I feared that uncovering the truth would mean confronting truths about those closest to us. Clara, sensing my mood, placed a hand on my shoulder. "Henry," she said softly, "we're in deep now. There's no turning back." Chapter 5. The Veil of Secrets. The fourth day following Sir Reginald Vane's murder cast Littlehampton in a restless haze, the village's usual rhythms disrupted by a tide of suspicion that seemed to seep into every conversation. The morning sun filtered through the elms, dappling the green with light, but the warmth did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the rectory. I, Reverend Henry Baxter, found myself adrift in my own home. The familiar creak of the floorboards, now a reminder of the violence that had invaded our lives. The study, still sealed by Inspector Graves' orders, loomed in my thoughts. Its locked door, a silent accusation. Clara, my wife, was in the parlour, sorting linens with a mechanical precision that betrayed her inner turmoil. "Henry," she said, folding a napkin with unnecessary care, "the village is turning on itself. I heard Mrs. Tuttle at the bakery this morning, saying Mrs. Crane was seen leaving the hall in tears the day before the murder. People are starting to talk." Her words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Mrs. Lydia Crane, Sir Reginald's housekeeper, had emerged as a figure of intrigue. Her reserved demeanour and rumoured conflicts with her employer fueling speculation. I nodded, my mind turning to Jenny's account of the argument between Mrs. Crane and Sir Reginald. "We should speak to her," I said. "If she's hiding something, it might shed light on why Sir Reginald was killed in our study." Clara's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw a flicker of unease. "Be careful, Henry," she said. "Mrs. Crane isn't one to open up easily. She's like a locked box, beautiful but impenetrable." Determined to pursue this lead, I made my way to Hampton Hall, where Mrs. Crane resided in a small apartment above the servants' quarters. The hall, with its ivy-clad walls and sagging grandeur, seemed to sag further under the weight of recent events. The front door was answered by a young maid, who informed me that Mrs. Crane was in the garden, tending to the herb beds. I found her there, kneeling among the rosemary, her dark hair pinned neatly, but her face pale, as if sleep had eluded her. "Mrs. Crane," I said, approaching with what I hoped was a reassuring smile, "might I have a word?" She rose, brushing dirt from her hands, her expression guarded. "Of course, Reverend," she said, her voice low and measured, "though I've told the police all I know." Her eyes, a deep hazel, avoided mine, and I sensed a tension beneath her calm exterior. I chose my words carefully. "There's talk in the village about an argument you had with Sir Reginald. Jenny saw you in the garden, and he seemed angry. Can you tell me what happened?" Mrs. Crane's hands stilled, and for a moment I thought she might refuse to answer. Then she sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. "Sir Reginald was difficult," she said. "He was displeased with my work, said I was too slow with the household accounts. We argued, yes, but it was nothing out of the ordinary. He was a man quick to anger. Her explanation was plausible, but her hesitation suggested more. "And the evening of the murder," I pressed. "You were seen leaving the hall with a bag. Where were you going?" Her lips tightened, and she turned back to the herbs, plucking a sprig of thyme with unnecessary force. "I visited a friend in Dorchester," she said. "I needed a change of air. The police have checked my story." Her tone was final, but I noted the absence of a name for this friend, a detail I filed away for Miss Finch. As I left the hall, I encountered Inspector Graves, who was striding up the drive with Constable Reed in tow. "Reverend," he said, his moustache twitching with irritation, "you're meddling again. Leave Mrs. Crane to us." I apologized, though I sensed his frustration stemmed more from the case's complexity than my presence. "Any progress, Inspector?" I asked. He grunted. "Lionel Vane's alibi is shaky, and we're looking into Mr. Gibbs's whereabouts. But this revolver, it's a puzzle. Not many in Little Hampton would have one, let alone know how to use it." His words echoed Miss Finch's earlier observations, and I resolved to share Mrs. Crane's reticence with her. Back at the Rectory, I found Clara in the kitchen speaking with Jenny, who was polishing silver with a nervous energy. "Reverend," Jenny said, glancing up, "I forgot to mention, Mrs. Crane got a letter a few days before the murder. I saw her reading it in the hall's kitchen, and she looked proper upset. Burned it in the grate right after." Her words sent a jolt through me. A burned letter suggested secrets, and secrets were the currency of murder. Clara's eyes widened. "Why didn't you tell the police, Jenny?" The girl flushed. "I didn't think it mattered, ma'am. I was afraid they'd think I was nosy." I reassured her, but my mind was racing. A letter, an argument, a hurried departure. Mrs. Crane was entangled in something deeper than a mere employer's wrath. That afternoon, Miss Finch arrived at the Rectory, her notebook now a veritable tome of scribbled clues. "Reverend Clara," she said, settling into a chair, "I've been making inquiries. Mrs. Crane's friend in Dorchester is a fiction. No one in the town recalls seeing her that evening. And I've learned something else. Mr. Wells, the chemist, sold her a bottle of chloral hydrate last week, claiming it was for sleeplessness. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes gleamed with the thrill of discovery." "Chloral hydrate?" Clara asked, frowning. "That's a strong sedative, isn't it?" Miss Finch nodded. "Indeed. Strong enough to knock someone out, or to ensure they don't wake for a while. Curious, don't you think, for a woman who claims to be merely nervous?" The implication hung in the air, and I felt a chill. Was Mrs. Crane planning something more sinister than a restless night? Miss Finch produced a small sketch from her notebook, a crude rendering of the brass button she'd found near the Rectory gate. "I've been studying this," she said. "The crest resembles one used by a regiment Lionel Vane briefly served in. It's not proof, but it's suggestive. And I've been thinking about the timing of the shot. 8 o'clock, when you, Reverend, were meant to be visiting Mrs. Tuttle. Someone knew your routine." Her words struck a nerve. My decision to stay home that evening, prompted by a sudden headache, had been known only to Clara and Jenny. I glanced at Clara, who was stirring her tea with unusual focus. "It's unsettling," she said, "to think someone planned this in our home. But why the Rectory? Why not the hall?" Miss Finch's smile was enigmatic. "The Rectory is neutral ground, my dear. A place where suspicion falls on many, not just one. Determined to pursue the lead about the letter, I suggested we visit Mr. Wells, the chemist, whose shop was a cramped emporium of bottles and powders. Mr. Wells, a nervous man with a habit of adjusting his spectacles, confirmed selling the chloral, hydrate to Mrs. Crane. She said she couldn't sleep," he stammered, avoiding Miss Finch's piercing gaze. Nothing unusual in that, but when pressed about her demeanour, he admitted she seemed agitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting pursuit. As we left the shop, Miss Finch paused by the village notice board, where a faded poster advertised the Harvest Festival. "Mrs. Crane is hiding something," she said. "That letter, the sedative, her absence from the hall, they form a pattern. But it's incomplete. We need to know who wrote to her and why she burned the evidence." Her words were a challenge, and I felt a surge of determination to help her unravel the mystery. That evening, the village gathered for a parish meeting, a sombre affair overshadowed by the murder. Mrs. Tuttle held court, her voice carrying over the hum of conversation. "I'm telling you, it's that housekeeper," she declared, "always skulking about, looking guilty." Mr. Gibbs, the butcher, was quieter, his usual bluster subdued, though I noticed his hands clench when Sir Reginald's name was mentioned. Lionel Vane was absent, reportedly packing for a trip to London, a move that only fueled the village's suspicions. As Clara and I walked home, the church clock tolled 9, its chimes a mournful echo of the night of the murder. "Henry," Clara said, her voice soft, "I keep thinking about that letter. What could have frightened Mrs. Crane so much?" I had no answer, but the question gnawed at me. The Rectory, once a place of peace, now felt like a stage for secrets, each one a thread in a tapestry of deceit. Miss Finch's relentless pursuit of the truth was our only hope of untangling it, but I feared what we might uncover in the process. Chapter 6. The Chemist's Burden. By the 5th day after Sir Reginald Vane's murder, Little Hampton had settled into a state of uneasy vigilance, its lanes and cottages alive with the hum of conjecture. The August sun continued its relentless assault, baking the earth and fraying tempers, as if the village itself were wilting under the strain of its secrets. The Rectory, my home and once a beacon of tranquillity, now stood as a grim monument to the crime, its windows watched by passers-by, who whispered of the blood-stained study. I, Reverend Henry Baxter, found my daily rounds, visits to the sick, preparations for Sunday's service, tinged with a surreal quality, as if I moved through a village no longer entirely my own. Clara, my wife, was in the dining-room, arranging flowers with a precision that belied her restless mood. "Henry," she said, snipping a wilted rose, "the village is buzzing about Mrs. Crane's letter. Mrs. Tuttle swears it was from a lover, but I think it's something darker. Why else would she burn it?" Her words echoed my own thoughts, stirred by Jenny's revelation about the housekeeper's distress. Mrs. Lydia Crane's secretive behaviour had become a focal point of suspicion, and I felt a growing urgency to uncover what she was hiding. Miss Eleanor Finch, our sharp-eyed spinster and unofficial sleuth, had taken a keen interest in Mr. Wells, the chemist, whose sale of chloral hydrate to Mrs. Crane hinted at more than sleepless nights. I resolved to accompany her to his shop, hoping to press him for details he might have withheld from the police. As we walked across the green, the village seemed to pulse with life, yet every glance felt weighted with suspicion. Tommy Gibbs, the butcher's son, was delivering parcels, his bicycle wobbling as he waved to us. "Heard anything new, Reverend?" he called, his grin more curious than respectful. I shook my head, but Miss Finch's eyes narrowed, as if she sensed even Tommy's chatter might hold a clue. Mr. Wells's shop was a cramped haven of glass bottles and pungent odours, its shelves lined with remedies for every ailment from gout to heartache. The chemist himself, a wiry man with thinning hair and a nervous tic, was dusting a counter when we entered. "Miss Finch, Reverend," he said, his spectacles slipping down his nose. "What brings you here?" His voice was polite, but his hands betrayed a tremor, as if our presence unsettled him. Miss Finch wasted no time. "Mr. Wells," she said, her tone deceptively mild, "we're curious about Mrs. Crane's purchase of chloral hydrate. You said it was for sleeplessness, but she seemed agitated when she came to you. Did she mention anything unusual? A letter, perhaps, or a reason for her distress?" Wells's face paled, and he busied himself rearranging a row of tinctures. "Nothing specific," he stammered. "She was tense, yes, but she only asked for the sedative, said she hadn't slept in days." Miss Finch's smile was razor-sharp, and yet chloral hydrate is a curious choice. Strong, isn't it? Almost too strong for mere insomnia. Wells swallowed, his eyes darting to the door. "It's not uncommon," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I interjected, sensing his discomfort. "Mr. Wells, Jenny saw Mrs. Crane burn a letter. If you know anything about it, it could help the police." He hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "She did mention a letter, Reverend, said it was from someone she'd rather forget. But I swear that's all I know." His admission, though vague, was a thread worth pulling. Miss Finch pressed further. "Did she name this person, or hint at what the letter contained?" Wells shook his head, his hands twisting a rag. "No names, but she looked frightened, like someone watching her back. I thought it was just nerves, but now—" He trailed off, his eyes flickering with guilt. Miss Finch thanked him, her expression unreadable, but as we left the shop, she murmured, "He's holding something back. I'll wager he knows more about that letter than he's letting on." Back at the rectory, Clara was waiting with news. "Henry, I spoke to Mrs. Tuttle at the post office. She claims she saw Mr. Wells himself near the rectory the evening of the murder, loitering by the churchyard gate. She thought he was delivering medicine, but he carried no bag." Her words sent a jolt through me. Wells, with his nervous demeanour and evasive answers, was an unlikely suspect, but his presence near the crime scene was troubling. Miss Finch, joining us for tea, listened intently. "Mr. Wells near the rectory," she said, her pen poised over her notebook. "That's curious, and his reticence about Mrs. Crane suggests a connection we've yet to uncover. We must consider the possibility that he's involved, not as the killer perhaps, but as someone who knows more than he should." Her mind was a labyrinth, each observation a step toward the truth, and I marvelled at her ability to see patterns where others saw only chaos. Determined to follow this new lead, I suggested we revisit the churchyard, where Mrs. Tuttle had seen Wells. The church, with its ancient yews and weathered tombstones, was a place of quiet reflection, but today it felt charged with secrets. Miss Finch examined the gate near the rectory, its hinges rusted but sturdy. "No signs of tampering," she said, "but it's easily climbed. And look here." She pointed to a patch of earth beneath a yew, where a faint indentation suggested a footprint partially obscured by leaves. "Too vague to be certain," she admitted, "but it's worth noting." As we returned to the rectory, we encountered Mr. Gibbs, the butcher, hauling a crate of meat to his shop. His face was flushed, his temper barely contained. "Reverend," he growled, "the police have been at me again, asking where I was when Vane was shot. I was in my shop, as I told them, but they don't believe me." His anger was palpable, and I recalled his earlier threats against Sir Reginald. "Mr. Gibbs," I said, "did you see anyone near the rectory that evening? Mr. Wells, perhaps?" He snorted. "That weasel! Wouldn't surprise me. Always skulking about, him and his bottles." His words, though dismissive, added to the growing picture of Wells's odd behaviour. That evening, Clara and I dined with Miss Finch at her cottage, where the air was thick with the scent of lavender and old books. Over a simple meal of soup and bread, Miss Finch laid out her thoughts. "Let's consider the facts," she said, her spectacles glinting in the lamplight. "Mrs. Crane received a letter that upset her, which she burned. She bought a strong sedative, claiming sleeplessness. Mr. Wells, who sold it to her, was seen near the rectory at the time of the murder, and the revolver, military precise, points to someone with knowledge of firearms, perhaps Lionel Vane, but perhaps not." Clara leaned forward, her eyes bright with curiosity. Could Wells be protecting Mrs. Crane? If he knows who wrote the letter, he might be afraid to speak. Miss Finch nodded. "A possibility. Or he might be protecting himself. Chemists deal in dangerous substances. Chloral hydrate, for instance, could be used for more than sleep. We must find out what that letter said." The conversation turned to Lionel Vane, whose shaky alibi at the Red Lion continued to unravel. "I spoke to Tommy Gibbs," Miss Finch said. "He claims he saw Lionel slip out the pub's back door around 8, though he can't be sure of the time. If true, it places him near the rectory when the shot was fired." I frowned, recalling Lionel's insistence that he was drunk and stationary. "He's hiding something," I said, "but murder? He seems too unsteady." Miss Finch's smile was enigmatic. "Weakness can mask cunning, Reverend. And don't forget the button I found. Its crest suggests a military connection, which points to Lionel, but also to others. Mr. Polk, for instance, served in the war, and Mr. Wells's father was an army surgeon. Might he have inherited such a button?" Her ability to weave connections was dizzying, and I felt the mystery deepening with every word. As we left the cottage, the village was cloaked in dusk, the church clock tolling a mournful 7. Clara, walking beside me, was quiet, her thoughts seemingly elsewhere. "Henry," she said at last, "this is getting dangerous. If Wells is involved, or Mrs. Crane, they might not take kindly to our prying." Her concern was valid, but I couldn't shake the need to know why Sir Reginald had died in our study, a place meant for sermons, not slaughter. Back at the rectory, I sat in the parlour, staring at the locked study door, the revolver, the letter, the sedative. Each was a piece in a puzzle that refused to take shape. Miss Finch's relentless pursuit of the truth was our guide, but I feared what we might uncover. The village of Little Hampton, with its quaint facade, was a maze of motives, and the killer, I sensed, was watching us, waiting for our next move. Chapter 7. The Whisper of the Note. The 6th day since Sir Reginald Vane's murder draped Little Hampton in a veil of unease, as if the village's very stones were holding their breath. The August heat had relented slightly, giving way to a restless breeze that stirred the leaves and carried whispers of suspicion from cottage to cottage. The Rectory, once my sanctuary as Reverend Henry Baxter, now felt like a stage where unseen players enacted a drama I could scarcely comprehend. The locked study door, still guarded by Inspector Graves' orders, loomed in my mind, a silent reminder of the violence that had shattered our peace. Clara, my wife, was in the drawing-room, mending a tear in one of my cassocks with a focus that seemed to anchor her against the village's growing agitation. "Henry," she said, her needle pausing, "I can't shake the feeling that we're missing something obvious. Mrs. Crane's letter, Mr. Wells's odd behaviour, it's all connected, but how?" Her question mirrored my own thoughts, stirred by Miss Eleanor Finch's relentless probing into the chemist's reticence and the housekeeper's secrets. The mystery was a tangle of threads, and I felt an urgent need to find the one that would unravel it. That morning, while Clara was at the market, I decided to tidy the rectory, hoping mundane tasks might clear my mind. The study remained off-limits, but the rest of the house needed attention, with dust gathering in corners and papers strewn about. As I swept the hall near the study door, my broom caught on a loose floorboard, revealing a small, crumpled piece of paper wedged beneath. My heart quickened as I retrieved it, smoothing it out to reveal a scrawled message in black ink. "It's me at 8. We must end this." The note was unsigned, its handwriting hurried but legible, and the paper bore the faint watermark of Hampton Hall stationery. The discovery sent a chill through me. 8 o'clock was the approximate time of Sir Reginald's death, and the note's presence in the rectory suggested it had been dropped by someone entering or leaving the study. I tucked it into my pocket, my mind racing with possibilities. Was this the lure that brought Sir Reginald to his death? And who had written it? I resolved to show it to Miss Finch, whose sharp mind was our best hope of deciphering its meaning. I found her at her cottage, surrounded by botanical sketches, and a pot of tea brewing on the stove. Her eyes lit up as I produced the note, her fingers tracing the watermark. "Hampton Hall paper," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "This is significant, Reverend. The note suggests a rendezvous, likely with the killer, and its location under a floorboard implies it was dropped in haste, perhaps during a struggle." She examined the handwriting, her brow furrowing. "It's not Lionel Vane's hand. I've seen his signature on parish documents. Nor is it Mrs. Crane's, from what I know of her neat script. But it's someone familiar with the hall." Clara returned from the market as we spoke, her basket laden with vegetables and news. "Henry, Miss Finch," she said, setting her load down. "The village is alight with talk. Mr. Gibbs was seen arguing with Mr. Wells this morning, something about unpaid bills. And Tommy Gibbs swears he saw Mrs. Crane near the churchyard the night of the murder, not in Dorchester as she claimed." Her words added fuel to the growing suspicion around the housekeeper, whose alibi was unravelling faster than Lionel Vane's. Miss Finch's eyes gleamed. Mrs. Crane's absence is troubling, but this note changes everything. It was written to draw Sir Reginald to the Rectory, I'm certain. And the choice of your study, Reverend, suggests the killer knew your movements. You were meant to be out that evening, weren't you? I nodded, recalling my cancelled visit to Mrs. Tuttle due to a headache, a fact known only to Clara and our maid, Jenny. The implication was unsettling, and I glanced at Clara, who was studying the note with an intensity that made me uneasy. Determined to pursue the note's origin, we visited Hampton Hall, where the butler, Mr. Grayson, a dour man with a penchant for silence, confirmed the stationery was used by the household staff and family. Anyone could have taken a sheet, he said, his eyes avoiding ours. Sir Reginald was particular about his correspondence, but the paper was kept in the library, accessible to all. His reticence was maddening, but Miss Finch's smile suggested she saw more in his demeanour than he intended to reveal. As we left the hall, we encountered Lionel Vane in the drive, his suitcase in hand, his face drawn with worry. "Reverend Miss Finch," he said, his charm strained, "I'm off to London tomorrow. The police have cleared me to go, but they're still hounding me about that blasted pub alibi." His voice held a note of desperation, and I wondered if his trip was an escape from more than just village gossip. "Mr. Vane," Miss Finch said, producing the note, "do you recognize this?" His eyes widened, but he shook his head. "Never seen it," he said too quickly. "Looks like our stationery, but I don't write notes like that." His denial was unconvincing, and Miss Finch's gaze lingered on him as he hurried away. "He's nervous," she said. "Not necessarily guilty, but he knows more than he's saying. We must check his luggage before he leaves. Discreetly, of course." Her suggestion was bold, but I agreed to keep an eye on Lionel's movements, though the thought of spying on a parishioner sat uneasily with me. Back at the Rectory, Clara was in the garden speaking with Mr. Polk, our gardener, whose temper had been frayed since Sir Reginald's insult to his roses. "Reverend," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, "I heard about that note. If it's from the hall, it could be anyone, staff, family, even a visitor. Sir Reginald had plenty of enemies." His words were blunt, but his eyes darted toward the study window, as if recalling something he'd rather forget. I pressed him gently. "Did you see anyone near the Rectory that evening, Mr. Polk?" He shook his head. "I was home by 6, as I told you. But that gate, it's never locked proper. Anyone could have slipped in." His mention of the gate echoed Miss Finch's earlier observation, and I felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting, though the picture remained elusive. That evening, we dined with Miss Finch at the Rectory, the note laid out on the table like a challenge. "Let's consider the timing," she said, sipping tea. "The note specifies 8 o'clock. The time of the murder. Sir Reginald was lured to the Rectory, expecting to meet someone. The killer used your absence, Reverend, to ensure privacy. But why your study? It's not just convenience, it's symbolic, a place of trust betrayed." Clara frowned, her fingers tracing the note's edges. "Could it be a woman's hand?" she asked. "The writing is hurried, but there's a certain elegance." Miss Finch nodded. "Possibly. Mrs. Crane's script is neat, but under pressure it might look like this. Or it could be someone else entirely. Someone with access to the halls, paper, and a reason to want Sir Reginald dead." Her words hung in the air, and I felt a growing dread. The note was a key, but to which lock? The village, meanwhile, was abuzz with new rumours. Mrs. Tuttle, ever the font of gossip, claimed to have seen a stranger in a tweed cap near the hall the day before the murder, a detail that echoed her earlier tale of a dark-coated man. Her stories were unreliable, but they kept the village on edge, and I wondered if she was inadvertently obscuring the truth. Tommy Gibbs, too, was spreading tales, claiming he'd overheard Mr. Wells muttering about debts and dangers at the shop. The chemist's nervous demeanour was becoming a focal point, and I resolved to confront him again. The next morning I visited Mr. Wells's shop, finding him alone, his hands shaking as he sorted pills. "Reverend," he said, his voice tight, "I've told you all I know about Mrs. Crane." I produced the note, watching his reaction. "This was found in the Rectory," I said. "It's from Hampton Hall. Did Mrs. Crane mention anything about a meeting with Sir Reginald?" Wells's face drained of colour, and he stammered, She never said anything about a meeting. That letter, it was personal," she said. "I don't know more." His panic was palpable, and I left the shop convinced he was hiding a crucial piece of the puzzle. As I walked home, the church clock tolled noon, its chimes a sombre reminder of the passing days. The note, the sedative, the unlatched gate, each was a thread in a web that ensnared little Hampton. Miss Finch's relentless pursuit of the truth was our guide, but I feared the cost of uncovering it. Clara, waiting at the Rectory, greeted me with a strange smile. "Henry," she said, "this note changes everything. Someone wanted Sir Reginald here, in our home. We're not just witnesses, we're part of this." Her words, heavy with truth, left me staring into the shadows of our once peaceful Rectory, wondering who among us held the key to the killer's identity. Chapter 8. The Alibi's Fragile Thread. The 7th day since Sir Reginald Vane's murder found little Hampton caught in a restless dance of suspicion and half-truths, its quaint lanes and cottages no longer a haven, but a stage for whispered accusations. The August breeze had turned cool, carrying the scent of impending rain, as if the heavens themselves were weary of the village's turmoil. The Rectory, my home as Reverend Henry Baxter, stood at the heart of this storm, its once welcoming facade, now a magnet for curious glances and hushed gossip. The locked study door, still under Inspector Graves's seal, was a constant reminder of the violence that had upended our lives. Clara, my wife, was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with a vigour that betrayed her agitation. "Henry," she said, her knife pausing mid-slice, "the village is tearing itself apart. Mrs. Tuttle swears Lionel Vane was seen slipping out of the Red Lion the night of the murder, and now Mr. Hodge is dodging questions. If his alibi falls apart, what then?" Her words echoed my own concerns, stirred by Miss Eleanor Finch's relentless pursuit of the truth behind the note found under the floorboard. Lionel's shaky alibi, coupled with the mysterious note, was a thread that threatened to unravel the entire mystery. Determined to test the barman's story, I set out for the Red Lion, where the air was thick with the tang of ale and the murmur of speculation. Mr. Hodge, polishing glasses behind the counter, greeted me with a strange smile. "Reverend," he said, his eyes darting to the door. "It's a bad business, this murder. The police won't leave me be." I leaned closer, keeping my voice low. "Mr. Hodge, you told the police Lionel Vane was here all evening, but Tommy, Gibbs says you left the bar around 8. Where were you?" Hodge's face flushed, and he busied himself with a rag. "I was checking the cellar," he said, his voice tight. "Barrels needed shifting. I wasn't gone long." His explanation was plausible, but his hesitation suggested more. "And Lionel?" I pressed. "Was he here when you returned?" Hodge's eyes flickered. "Aye, he was there, drunk as a lord. But I might have been out a bit longer than I said. 10 minutes, maybe." His admission was a crack in the foundation of Lionel's alibi, and I felt a surge of excitement mingled with dread. As I left the pub, I encountered Tommy Gibbs, his bicycle propped against a wall, his face alight with the thrill of gossip. "Reverend," he said, lowering his voice, "I didn't just see Mr. Hodge leave. I saw Lionel slip out the back door too, right around 8. He looked furtive, like he didn't want to be seen." Tommy's penchant for embellishment was well known, but his story aligned with Hodge's faltering account. I urged him to tell Inspector Graves, though I suspected the boy preferred the drama of whispering to his peers. Back at the rectory, I shared Tommy's revelation with Clara, who was arranging a vase of dahlias with a distracted air. "If Lionel left the pub," she said, "he could have reached the rectory in minutes. But why our study, Henry? It's as if the killer wanted to draw us into this." Her words echoed Miss Finch's theory about the deliberate choice of the rectory, and I felt a chill. The note, "Meet me at 8, we must end this," suggested a planned rendezvous. But with whom? And why in my study, a place I was meant to have left empty that evening? Miss Finch arrived shortly after, her grey coat dusted with chalk from a morning spent sketching in the churchyard. She listened to my account of Hodge's confession, her eyes gleaming behind her spectacles. "So, Lionel's alibi is crumbling," she said, producing her notebook. "And the note, Hampton Hall stationery, unsigned, points to someone with access to the household. But let's consider another angle. Mr. Hodge's absence from the bar is curious. Why lie about 10 minutes, unless he's protecting someone or himself?" Her suggestion was startling. Mr. Hodge, a jovial man with a penchant for tall tales, seemed an unlikely conspirator, but his evasiveness was undeniable. "Could he have seen something?" I asked. Miss Finch nodded. "Or done something. We mustn't rule out anyone, Reverend. The village is a web, and every thread leads somewhere." Her words were a reminder of her methodical approach, each observation a step toward the truth. Determined to confront Lionel, I accompanied Miss Finch to Hampton Hall, where we found him in the library, surrounded by crates of books he was packing for his London trip. His charm was frayed, his eyes bloodshot, as if sleep had eluded him. "Reverend Miss Finch," he said, forcing a smile, "I'm leaving tomorrow, police or no police. This village is suffocating me." His suitcase, half packed, lay open on a table, and I noticed a glint of metal, a small pocket-knife with a crest similar to the button Miss Finch had found. "Mr. Vane," Miss Finch said, her tone deceptively mild, "your alibi at the Red Lion is in question. Mr. Hodge admits he left the bar, and Tommy Gibbs saw you slip out around 8. Care to explain?" Lionel's face paled, his fingers tightening on a book. I stepped out for air," he stammered. "The pub was stifling, and I needed a moment. I was back before anyone noticed." His explanation was weak, and Miss Finch's gaze was unrelenting. "Back in time to avoid suspicion, perhaps," she said. "Or to slip to the rectory." Lionel's indignation flared. "I didn't kill my uncle," he snapped. "Yes, I left the pub, but I went to meet a man about a debt, a creditor from Dorchester. I was gone 20 minutes, no more." His story echoed his earlier claim about the tweed-capped man, but his nervousness suggested he was withholding something. Miss Finch pressed further, showing him the note. "Recognize this?" she asked. Lionel's eyes widened, but he shook his head. "It's our paper, but I didn't write it. I swear it." As we left the hall, Miss Finch was silent, her mind clearly racing. "He's lying about something," she said at last. "Not necessarily the murder, but he's entangled in this. That knife, its crest matches the button. We must verify his creditor story." Her determination was infectious, and I agreed to help, though the thought of confronting a parishioner's secrets weighed heavily on me. That evening, the village gathered for a prayer service at St. Swithin's, a sombre affair meant to calm frayed nerves. Mrs. Tuttle was there, her shawl clutched tightly, whispering to a neighbour about Mr. Wells's shady dealings. Mr. Gibbs, the butcher, sat in the back, his face grim, avoiding my gaze. Mrs. Crane was absent, her absence noted by the congregation's murmurs. Clara, beside me, whispered, "Henry, this service feels like a funeral for the village's peace. Everyone's watching everyone else." After the service, I spoke with Mr. Polk, our gardener, who lingered near the churchyard gate. "Reverend," he said, his voice low, "I've been thinking about that night. I didn't mention before, but I saw a light flicker in the rectory garden before I left, around 6. Thought it was you, but now I'm not sure." His revelation was startling, suggesting someone had been near the rectory hours before the murder. I thanked him, my mind turning to the unlatched gate and the possibility of a premeditated act. Back at the rectory, Miss Finch joined us for tea, her notebook now a labyrinth of clues. "The light Mr. Polk saw," she said, "could be significant. Someone was scouting the rectory, perhaps ensuring the study was empty. And Lionel's absence from the pub places him in the right time and place. But we mustn't overlook Mr. Hodge. His lie about the cellar suggests complicity, or fear." She paused, her eyes narrowing, "and Mrs. Crane's absence tonight is telling. She's avoiding scrutiny, but she can't hide forever." Clara, pouring tea, frowned. "What about Mr. Wells? His nervousness, his proximity to the rectory. Could he be involved?" Miss Finch nodded. "Possibly. His sale of chloral hydrate to Mrs. Crane is suspicious, and his reluctance to talk about the letter suggests he knows more. We must find out who wrote that note and why it was left in the rectory." Her words were a challenge, and I felt the weight of the mystery pressing closer. As night fell, the village settled into a tense quiet, the church clock tolling 10 with a mournful resonance. Clara and I sat in the parlour, the note on the table. Between us, its words a haunting refrain. "Meet me at 8. We must end this." The rectory, once a place of solace, now felt like a trap, its walls echoing with secrets. Miss Finch's relentless pursuit of the truth was our only guide, but I feared the cost of following it. The killer, I sensed, was closer than we imagined, watching from the shadows of Littlehampton's deceptively peaceful lanes. Chapter 9. The Housekeeper's Burden. The 8th day since Sir Reginald Vane's murder cloaked Littlehampton in a shroud of restless anticipation, the village's once peaceful lanes now thrumming with an undercurrent of fear and fascination. The morning dawned grey, with clouds rolling in from the Dorset hills, casting a pall over the green that mirrored the mood within the rectory. I, Reverend Henry Baxter, found myself increasingly estranged from the rhythms of my calling, my thoughts consumed by the locked study door and the unanswered questions it guarded. The note, "Meet me at 8. We must end this," found under the floorboard, had become a talisman of the mystery, its words echoing in my mind like a challenge. Clara, my wife, was in the parlour, polishing a silver candlestick with a vigour that suggested she was battling her own unease. "Henry," she said, her cloth pausing, "Mrs. Crane's absence is the talk of the village. Mrs. Tuttle claims she's fled to avoid the police, but I wonder if she's hiding from something or someone else." Her words resonated with my own suspicions, fueled by Miss Eleanor Finch's relentless pursuit of the housekeeper's secretive movements. Mrs. Crane's purchase of chloral hydrate, her burned letter, and her unverified trip to Dorchester had painted her as a figure of intrigue, and I felt a pressing need to find her. Miss Finch, ever the beacon of clarity in our muddled village, had been making discreet inquiries through her network of contacts. Over breakfast, she arrived at the rectory with news that sent a jolt through me. "Reverend Clara," she said, her spectacles glinting with purpose, "I've traced Mrs. Crane to a boarding house in Dorchester, run by a Mrs. Harrow. She checked in the day after the murder, using her maiden name, Lydia Warren. The police haven't found her yet, but I intend to pay her a visit." Her determination was infectious, and I agreed to accompany her, though Clara's frown suggested she worried about the risks of such a confrontation. The journey to Dorchester was a quiet one, the train rattling through fields that seemed untouched by the village's turmoil. Miss Finch, her notebook in hand, reviewed her clues with a precision that reminded me of a general planning a campaign. "Mrs. Crane's flight is telling," she said, her voice low to avoid the ears of fellow passengers. "She's not just avoiding the police, she's afraid. The letter, the sedative, her argument with Sir Reginald, they point to a secret she's desperate to keep. But we must tread carefully. A cornered soul can be unpredictable." The boarding house, a modest red brick building on a quiet street, was presided over by Mrs. Harrow, a stout woman with a no-nonsense air. She confirmed that Miss Warren was staying in a room on the 2nd floor, but warned us that she was skittish as a cat. We climbed the narrow stairs, the air heavy with the scent of lavender polish, and knocked on Mrs. Crane's door. After a long pause, it opened to reveal the housekeeper, her dark hair loose, her face pale and drawn. "Reverend Miss Finch," she said, her voice trembling, "what do you want?" Miss Finch's tone was gentle but firm. "Mrs. Crane, we know you left the hall the night of the murder, and your story about visiting a friend doesn't hold. We found a note in the rectory. Meet me at 8. We must end this. Written on Hampton Hall paper. Did you write it?" Mrs. Crane's eyes widened, and she stepped back, her hands clutching the doorframe. I don't know anything about a note," she said. but her voice faltered and tears welled in her eyes. Sensing her distress, I spoke softly. "Mrs. Crane, we're not here to accuse you, but to understand. Jenny saw you burn a letter, and Mr. Wells said you were frightened. If you're in trouble, let us help." Her resolve crumbled, and she sank onto a chair, her hands covering her face. "It was Sir Reginald," she said, her voice breaking. "He was blackmailing me. Years ago, in London, I was involved in a scandal. A theft I didn't commit, but was blamed for. He found out, threatened to expose me unless I did what he wanted." Her confession hung in the air, heavy with shame and fear. Miss Finch's expression remained calm, but her eyes were sharp. "And the letter you burned?" she asked. Mrs. Crane hesitated, then continued. "It was from him, demanding I meet him at the Rectory that evening. He said he had proof of my past and would ruin me if I didn't comply. I wrote back, the note you found, agreeing to meet him at 8 to plead with him. But I couldn't face him. I left the hall instead, went for a walk in the churchyard. I swear I didn't kill him." Her story was compelling, but Miss Finch's gaze was unrelenting. "You were in the churchyard, not Dorchester," she pressed. Mrs. Crane nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I was afraid. I thought if I stayed away, he'd leave me alone. When I heard he was dead, I panicked and came here." Her words were a partial confession, but they left gaps. Why the Rectory? And who fired the shot if not her? We left the boarding house with more questions than answers, the weight of Mrs. Crane's story pressing on us. On the train back to Littlehampton, Miss Finch was silent, her notebook open but untouched. "She's telling part of the truth," she said at last. "The note confirms she lured Sir Reginald to the Rectory, but her flight suggests fear, not guilt. Someone else used that meeting to kill him. We must find out who knew about her letter and who had the revolver." Back in the village, the atmosphere was charged with new rumours. Mrs. Tuttle, ever vigilant, accosted us at the station, her shawl flapping like a flag of gossip. "Reverend, they're saying Mrs. Crane's run off with a lover, and Mr. Gibbs was seen shouting at Mr. Wells again, something about a debt." Her words were a jumble, but they hinted at tensions we hadn't yet explored. I thanked her, my mind turning to the chemist's nervous demeanour and his possible role in the mystery. At the Rectory, Clara was waiting, her face pale. "Henry, while you were gone, Tommy Gibbs came by. He says he saw Mr. Wells near the churchyard the night of the murder carrying a small package. He thought it was medicine, but now he's not sure." Her news aligned with Mrs. Tuttle's earlier sighting, and I felt a surge of unease. Mr. Wells, with his access to sedatives and his evasive answers, was becoming a figure of increasing interest. Miss Finch, joining us for tea, listened intently. "A package in the churchyard," she mused, sketching a map of the Rectory grounds in her notebook. "It could be nothing, or everything. We know Mrs. Crane was there, not in Dorchester. Perhaps Wells was meeting her, or someone else. And the revolver. Its military design keeps pointing us to Lionel Vane. But we mustn't overlook Mr. Polk's war service, or even Wells's father, the army surgeon. Her ability to weave connections was dizzying, and I marvelled at her clarity amidst the village's chaos. Determined to pursue the churchyard lead, we visited the site at dusk. the yews casting long shadows across the tombstones. Miss Finch examined the ground near the gate, her eyes catching a glint of metal, a small key, half buried in the dirt. "A house key," she said, holding it up. "Not the rectory's, I'd wager, but perhaps the hall's. Someone dropped it in haste." The discovery was tantalizing, suggesting a link to Mrs. Crane's walk or Wells's mysterious package. As we returned to the rectory, the village was settling into a tense quiet, the church clock tolling 8 with an eerie resonance that recalled the night of the murder. Clara, waiting in the parlour, looked troubled. "Henry, Miss Finch," she said, "this key, Mrs. Crane's confession, it's all so close to home. What if the killer is someone we trust?" Her question hung in the air, and I felt a growing dread. The rectory, once a haven, now felt like a trap, its secrets entwined with those of Little Hampton. Miss Finch's relentless pursuit of the truth was our only guide, but I feared what we would find when the final thread was pulled. Chapter 10. The truth unlocked the 9th day since Sir Reginald Vane's murder descended upon Little Hampton with a brooding intensity, the sky heavy with clouds that promised a storm to break the lingering August heat. The village, once a tapestry of quaint charm, now pulsed with a nervous energy, its lanes and cottages alive with the murmur of secrets on the verge of exposure. The rectory, my home as Reverend Henry Baxter, stood at the epicentre of this unrest, its walls seeming to echo with the unanswered questions that had haunted us since that fateful gunshot. The study, though no longer sealed, remained a place of dread, its air thick with the memory of blood and betrayal. Clara, my wife, was in the drawing-room, arranging a tray of tea with a quiet determination that masked her inner turmoil. "Henry," she said, her voice low, "the village is holding its breath. Mrs. Tuttle stopped me this morning, insisting the killer must be an outsider, but I can't help feeling it's someone we know, someone close." Her words, heavy with foreboding, mirrored my own fears, stirred by Miss Eleanor Finch's relentless pursuit of the truth. The note, "Meet me at 8. We must end this." The key found in the churchyard, and Mrs. Crane's partial confession had woven a web of suspicion that now tightened around us all. Miss Finch, our sharp-eyed spinster, and the village's unofficial detective, had proposed a gathering at the rectory that evening to confront the key players in the mystery. "We must bring them together," she had said, her spectacles glinting with purpose, "to see who flinches under scrutiny." Her plan was bold, almost theatrical, but I trusted her instincts. She had pieced together fragments, the revolvers, military design, the Hampton Hall stationery, the chloral hydrate, the key, into a pattern that promised to reveal the killer. I agreed to host, though the thought of turning my home into a stage for such a reckoning filled me with dread. By 7 o'clock, the rectory's parlour was filled with an uneasy assembly. Clara, pale but composed, Lionel Vane, his charm frayed by days of suspicion, Mrs. Lydia Crane, her eyes haunted since her return from Dorchester, Mr. Wells, the chemist, fidgeting with his spectacles, Mr. Hodge, the barman, his joviality replaced by a sullen wariness, and Mr. Polk, our gardener, his weathered face set in a scowl. Inspector Graves and Constable Reed stood by the door, their presence a reminder of the law's watchful eye. The air was thick with tension, the ticking of the grandfather clock, a relentless countdown to the truth. Miss Finch stood at the centre of the room, her grey coat neatly buttoned, her notebook tucked away as if she no longer needed it. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice calm but commanding. "Sir Reginald Vane's murder has torn the fabric of Littlehampton, and tonight we will mend it by uncovering the truth. The killer is among us, and the clues, carefully laid, point to one person." She began with the note, holding it up for all to see. This was found under a floorboard in the Rectory, written on Hampton Hall paper. It lured Sir Reginald to his death at 8 o'clock in the Reverend's study. Mrs. Crane, you admitted writing it to confront Sir Reginald about his blackmail, but you claim you didn't meet him, instead walking in the churchyard. Is that true? Mrs. Crane nodded, her hands trembling. "I swear it. I couldn't face him. I left the note, but I didn't shoot him." Miss Finch turned to Lionel Vane. "Mr. Vane, your alibi at the Red Lion was false. Mr. Hodge admitted leaving the bar, and Tommy Gibbs saw you slip out around 8. You claimed to meet a creditor, but no such person has been found. Your uncle's death leaves you his heir. A strong motive." Lionel's face flushed, his voice rising. "I didn't kill him. Yes, I left the pub, but only to clear my head. I was back before the shot was fired." Mr. Hodge shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor. Miss Finch's gaze settled on him. "Mr. Hodge, you lied about staying at the bar. You were gone for 10 minutes, perhaps more. Why? Were you paid to cover for Mr. Vane, or did you see something you're afraid to admit?" Hodge's ruddy face paled. "I wasn't paid," he muttered. "I just stepped out to the cellar. I didn't see anything." Miss Finch's smile was thin. "And yet, the revolver, a Webley Mark IV military issue, points to someone with access to such a weapon. Mr. Vane, you served briefly in the army. Mr. Polk, you fought in the war. And Mr. Wells, your father was an army surgeon. Any of you could have obtained it." Mr. Wells flinched, his spectacles slipping. "I know nothing about guns," he stammered. Mr. Polk grunted, his eyes narrowing. "I've not touched a weapon since the war." The room grew quieter, the tension palpable. Miss Finch produced the key found in the churchyard. This key, likely from Hampton Hall, was dropped near the Rectory gate. Someone was there, perhaps watching, perhaps planning. "Mrs. Crane, you were in the churchyard that night. Did you drop it?" Mrs. Crane shook her head, her voice barely audible. "It's not mine. I had no key with me." Miss Finch's gaze swept the room, then settled on Clara, who sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly. "Mrs. Baxter," she said, her voice softening, "you've been a pillar through this ordeal, but there's one detail we cannot ignore. The Rectory was chosen for a reason. The killer knew the Reverend's routine, knew he was meant to be out visiting Mrs. Tuttle that evening. Only 2 people knew of his change of plans, you and Jenny the maid. Jenny was away, but you were home alone when the shot was fired." Clara's eyes widened, her face draining of colour. "Miss Finch, you can't mean—" she began, but Miss Finch raised a hand. "Let me finish. The chloral hydrate Mr. Wells sold to Mrs. Crane was found in the Rectory's kitchen, hidden in a tin of tea, a sedative strong enough to ensure someone—" perhaps the Reverend, slept through a critical moment. And this? She produced a handkerchief, monogrammed with Clara's initials, found near the study window. It was dropped the night of the murder, near the revolver. The room erupted in gasps, all eyes turning to Clara. I felt a cold dread grip me, my heart pounding. "Clara," I said, my voice hoarse, "what is this?" She laughed, a brittle sound that shattered the silence. "This is absurd. That handkerchief could have been taken from the laundry, and the sedative, I never touched it." Her defiance was fierce, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. Miss Finch's voice was steady. "Mrs. Baxter, you resented Sir Reginald's influence over the village, his threats to cut the church fund that supports your livelihood. You knew his routine, his arguments with Mrs. Crane. You borrowed Lionel's revolver, perhaps from his suitcase, where I saw a matching knife, and used Mrs. Crane's note to lure Sir Reginald to the Rectory. You opened the window to suggest an intruder, but the lack of footprints betrayed you. And the sedative ensured the Reverend was asleep, unaware of your actions." Clara's laughter faded, her hands trembling. "You can't prove it," she whispered. Miss Finch's smile was sad. "The handkerchief, the sedative, your knowledge of the routine, it's enough. And Mr. Wells, under pressure, admitted you asked him about chloral hydrate weeks ago, claiming it was for a friend." Wells nodded, his face ashen. "I thought it was harmless." Clara broke, her voice a sob. "I did it for us, Henry. Sir Reginald was ruining everything, the church, our home. He was a tyrant, and I couldn't let him destroy us." Her confession, raw and desperate, filled the room with a stunned silence. Inspector Graves stepped forward, his face grim. "Mrs. Baxter, you're under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Vane." As he led her away, her eyes met mine, filled with a plea I couldn't answer. The village reeled in the days that followed, the shock of Clara's guilt rippling through the lanes. Miss Finch, walking home under the gathering storm, paused at the Rectory gate. "People underestimate a village, Reverend," she said softly. "But its secrets always surface, like stones in a ploughed field." I nodded, my heart heavy with loss. The Rectory, once a haven, was now a hollow shell, its peace shattered by a truth I hadn't dared to see. Little Hampton would heal, but I knew I would carry the weight of that night forever.